Today, we don't normally have to worry about whether or not our food is safe to eat. We generally trust that government regulations keep our food safe or inform us when it is not. However, this has not always been the case. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, the food industry was cruel to its workers and consumers.
It was too dark in these storage places to see well, but a man could run his hand over these piles of meat and sweep off handfuls of the dried dung of rats. These rats were nuisances, and the packers would put poisoned bread out for them. They would die, and then rats, bread, and meat would go into the hoppers together.
The Food and Drug Administration was established in 1906 as a result of the outcry caused by Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, which exposed the appalling state of the meatpacking industry and working conditions, leading to the creation of the FDA to be responsible for ensuring safer food and working conditions. The Jungle was a major step in exposing the irresponsibilities in the public health sector and consumer rights. It demonstrated how literature can ignite change within government accountability to protect individuals' rights to safe labeled products and the responsibility of businesses to uphold ethical practices. Let's consider a timeline of some of the major attempts to regulate food safety. Prior to the FDA, there were a few regulations on the food industry. Restrictions on food and pharmaceuticals did not become a big concern until the 20th century. From 1879 to 1906, nearly 100 bills were introduced in Congress in hopes to regulate food and drugs, but most were unsuccessful. The USDA was created on May 15, 1862, under the presidency of Abraham Lincoln to support farmers and improve agricultural processes. Between 1879 and 1906, there were numerous legislative efforts aimed to regulate food and drugs in the United States. This reflected growing public concern over product safety and consumer protection. Here are a few notable examples. The 1879 Bill for the Prevention of Adulteration of Food and Drugs. This early proposal sought to prohibit the manufacture and sale of adulterated food and drugs, addressing widespread issues of contamination and mislabeling. Despite its intentions, the bill failed to gain sufficient support in Congress and did not become law. In 1884, President Chester Arthur signed an act establishing the USDA Bureau of Animal Industry. This organization was charged with preventing diseased animals from being used as food. Multiple quarantine stations were established along with custom offices on the Canadian and Mexican borders to serve as safeguards against foreign animal diseases. In 1890, President Benjamin Harrison signed the Meat Inspection Act. This legislation charged the USDA with inspecting salted pork and bacon intended for export. In 1891, the law was expanded to include all live cattle and beef for exportation. The act was an early attempt to address concerns about unsanitary conditions in the meatpacking industry. The 1902 Biologics Control Act. Prompted by incidents of contaminated vaccines causing fatalities, this act sought to regulate the production of biological products, including vaccines and antitoxins, by requiring federal licensing and inspections. It marked one of the first successful federal efforts to ensure drug safety. These acts were not enough to stop the unhealthy practices of the meat handling firms. In the early 1900s, progressive leaders publicly denounced meatpacking firms for their hazardous working conditions and unfair business tactics. Packingtown, the name for the Union stockyards in Chicago, becomes the main target. In 1904, the workers of the Meatpackers Union in Chicago went on strike, advocating for improved wages and safety protocols, which has gained significant attention at a national level. In 1905, the editor to Appeal to Reason recommended that Upton Sinclair, a progressive era journalist notorious for his exposés, be entitled to investigate the strike. Sinclair disguised himself and went undercover in Chicago's meatpacking plants to examine the condition and conduct interviews with employees, families, lawyers, doctors, and social workers. 1906 saw the publication of Sinclair's works in a book titled The Jungle. The original aim of The Jungle was to investigate labor conditions, however it also exposed the revolting meat handling practices. 5 publishers rejected the book for being too shocking, before Doubleday accepted and printed it. The novel, originally intending to provide insight for worker safety and rights, had initiated distress over feculent processed meats. Its readers were outraged with the gruesome depictions of tainted meat processing. Popularity of The Jungle soared, and it became an international bestseller, translated into 17 languages. The public outcry over unsanitary meat handling led to a potential economic crisis as domestic and foreign meat purchases fell. I aimed at the public's heart, and by accident I hit it in the stomach. I realized with bitterness that I had been made into a celebrity. not because the public cared anything about the workers, but simply because the public did not want to eat tubercular beef. In response to the public outcry, President Theodore Roosevelt directed the U.S. Department of Agriculture to investigate Upton Sinclair's allegations. The investigation was conducted by Labor Commissioner Charles P. Neal and social worker James Bronson Reynolds. Not only were Sinclair's claims confirmed, but the Neal-Reynolds report suggested conditions were worse than described. President Roosevelt overcame meatpacker opposition and signed the Meat Inspection Act of 1906. The act authorized USDA inspectors to prevent contaminated or mislabeled meat from entering the market. President Roosevelt also signed the Pure Food and Drug Act, establishing the FDA and laying the foundation for food safety regulations. The FDA itself has acknowledged Upton Sinclair's hand by stating the nauseating condition of the meatpacking industry that Upton Sinclair captured in the jungle was the final precipitating force behind both a meat inspection law and a comprehensive food and drug law. The Food and Drug Administration and the United States Department of Agriculture are two distinct federal agencies in the United States. They generally have different responsibilities related to the regulation of food and drugs. One of the FDA's responsibilities is the safety of most of the food supply in the United States, with the exception of meat, poultry, and egg products. Meat, poultry, and egg safety falls into the domain of the USDA. The Pure Food and Drug Act was revolutionary in government responsibility and consumer consumption rights. With the majority of citizens not having much knowledge of bacteria and parasites at the time, it was a significant advancement, despite the need for several more acts to come. In 1938, the United States Congress granted the U.S. Food and Drug Administration the authority to regulate the safety of food, pharmaceuticals, medical devices, and cosmetics. The Food Additives Amendment of 1958 required manufacturers to prove that any food additives used in their products were safe for human consumption before being widely used. In 1957, Congress passed the Poultry Products Inspection Act. It should be noted that the Federal Meat Inspection Act did not cover poultry. The Poultry Products Inspection Act ensured that poultry products shipped in interstate commerce are continuously inspected. In 1970, Congress passed the Egg Products Inspection Act, mandatory continuous inspection of liquid, frozen, or dried egg products. The Food Safety Inspection Service, a USDA agency, issued a landmark rule, Pathogen Reduction HACCP Systems. The rule focuses on the prevention and reduction of microbial pathogens on raw products that can cause illness. Today, those affected by food poisoning or tainted food from a certified establishment, such as a supplier, restaurant, or store, can sue the business itself or its supplier.
More than 150 people have become ill after eating tainted hamburger meat at Jack in the Box restaurants in Idaho and Washington state. One child has died.
This led to the regulation on the cooking of beef patties and the temperature used to ensure the destruction of E. coli.
The very same strain of E. coli found in contaminated romaine lettuce last year is once again in romaine lettuce this year, and it's causing sickness. 32 people in 11 states and 18 people in Canada, in Ontario and Quebec, falling sick just since last month.
Boar's Head has recalled an additional 7 million pounds of deli meat. The CDC says 2 people have been killed. Nearly 3 dozen across 13 states are ill.
Consistent reporting has led to organized product recalls should problems get through the supply chain. They are usually stopped at the source or expressed to the public so further action can be taken. Over the years, these laws have expanded into other food groups, most prominently vegetables and poultry today. Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, which exposed the appalling working conditions in the meatpacking industry, sparked a public outrage that resulted in the establishment of the Food and Drug Administration in 1906. Through the USDA and FDA, the U.S. government has taken action to ensure safer conditions in food, as well as to notify the public about any contaminated food products. The significance of the book is still explored today. School children may read The Jungle as part of some school curriculums. The novel's influence is evident, demonstrating how literature can spur change and encourage the government to be responsible for protecting citizens' rights. The right to sue certified establishments for food poisoning or contaminated food is valued by U.S. consumers and has led to legislative change and further protections.